Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thank you for spending some of your valuable time with me today. I sort of had a plan for this week, and then I ditched it because of some of the news stuff. And normally I like to be way more prepared and have some clips and things like that, but some of the news of the last couple of days sort of changed that, and so I just wanted to talk kind of briefly about my concerns about the news of the week. Specifically, there were two things that happened this week that I think are interesting in the sense that they happened on the same day, I believe, actually. So we had two different things that happened. So you probably heard, if you have not been hiding under a rock, that last week a man in New York gunned down the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, and murdered him. And it looked like an assassination in the sense that the guy had a gun with a silencer, obviously had very well planned, and got away for about a week, right? I think it's December 4th is the murder. Not quite a week. So on the same day, they catch the alleged killer in that case, whose name is Luigi Mangioni. I believe I'm saying that right. They catch him in Pennsylvania. I want to use the word alleged because, everyone's innocent until proven guilty, for sure. Although he was caught with a ghost gun, which I want to talk briefly about in a moment, and had a silencer and cash and several fake IDs. And one of the IDs, I believe they've said matches the name that the alleged killer, checked into a hostel with in New York. So prosecutors and the police seem to think they have a pretty slam dunk case here. Allegedly also had a manifesto and a notebook that basically admitted some of the planning of it. I'm very curious about a lot of the details of this case, and I don't want to get into it here because I don't feel like in these situations we often get the right information, even from journalists that are trying to do their best job, mostly just because there's a lot of people that try to get things out first as opposed to getting them right. And not to mention, sometimes the information we're getting, even from the police, is incorrect. For example, just a few days ago, we were being told that this guy used a modern version of a British World War II weapon that was an all-in-one gun and silencer, and it was basically this is for non-gun nerds, this is going to be weird. I'd never heard of this weapon, and I like guns, I have guns, but I'd never heard of this it was basically a bolt-action handgun that didn't eject a cartridge, and so assassinations could actually pull that thing and actually keep the cartridge, and this was used in World War II for British assassins. So that's what a week ago we were being told was the weapon that was used, and now we're being told it was a ghost gun. Like I said, I'll get into that in a little bit. Ghost gun just means that it's sort of an untraceable gun in the sense that it was either made at home, essentially, by a 3D printer, or there are kits that you can buy that aren't quite the full gun, but you have to do some work. You actually have to know what you're doing, drill some holes in some metal and things like that to put this thing together. Allegedly, in this situation, some people are saying maybe the bottom part of the handgun was printed with a 3D printer, while the some of the other mechanisms were actually bought off the internet. We don't know all the details of this. Allegedly, the silencer was also 3D printed. Again, these details might be out of date tomorrow. And so I don't want to be in a situation where I'm spouting a bunch of stuff or speculating about stuff when we don't know all the details. And I don't think all the details matter because that's not what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about the details of the case. I want to talk about something else. So anyway, this guy murders the CEO of United Healthcare. And before they catch him, and I posted a short about it over the weekend, there was sort of this weird reaction online, or at least I thought was weird and kind of scary. A lot of people were kind of, defending his actions and saying, well, healthcare CEO seems like I can't cry for this guy. That's kind of what I initially saw was it's hard to feel sorry for the victim of this. Who I think by the way, is a father and a husband. And I think that reaction alone is kind of gross. But it's escalated way past that. It also kind of got framed as a left-right thing. I don't know if that's right either, because I see a lot of people on the right. Ben Shapiro's gotten in some trouble this last week for posting stuff about the left's reaction to this violence and excusing violence. He's gotten a lot of pushback from the right saying, no, we don't like this CEO either. We don't like healthcare. And we're with the guy that killed this guy. And it turned into not necessarily just an excusing of violence when you think that needs to happen because of tribal reasons or partisan reasons or whatever. It became a sort of cheering on and hero worship of it. And so that seems kind of like a weird switch. And on the same day that they catch this alleged killer, we get a not guilty verdict and a dismissal of the other charges against Jacob Penney, who was the guy in New York who was a former Marine on the subway. Homeless guy is screaming and yelling, acting violently, and saying he's ready to die. And in the subway car, you're in the subway, you can't get away from that. And Jacob Penney puts this guy in a chokehold to subdue him, and the guy ends up dying. It's tragic, obviously, but we get the verdict in this situation. It became a thing a couple years ago when this happened because it became an identity politics thing. The homeless guy was black and Jacob Penney is white. And so it became this race thing, of course. And so you had people dividing on the sides of, well, no, we're for this guy, we're against this guy. But in the verdict specifically, and since then, what I've noticed is a sort of similar hero worship of him. And I think they're totally different cases. The premeditated murder of someone is different than in the moment trying to defend the people you're around, being scared in a situation, self-defense, call it whatever you want. And that gets a little bit more murky. And so the details are not the same at all. But the reaction has sort of is that there's been this sort of hero worship of both people. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, why are we doing this? Why are we as a country and citizens, lifting up, not just excusing something or just saying, oh, there's some understandable reasons this could have happened, and instead going straight towards that guy's the hero of this story and the other guy's the villain of the story. Because you're seeing that. It's not on the right specifically. Like I said, I think the Jacob Penney verdict was correct. I think that it was clearly a sort of not just self-defense, but a defense of the people within the subway car, that you could not escape the place. There was no duty to retreat. There was nowhere to retreat to. I also think the extenuating circumstances of this guy being a, homeless, mentally ill, drug addicted, all these other things potentially, that chokehold might not have killed me, but maybe kills him. So I think it's not criminal. But there's a difference between something being not criminally, someone not being criminally liable and being hailed as a hero, in the sense that what I feel like both of these stories have done is expose that it's not really about defending a side or a tribe, which is what I've said over and over again. And I think that I was wrong. I think that really this has become, people have decided what they think is right and wrong, what's not just right and wrong, what's good and evil. And if you fall on the evil side, then all actions are justifiable against that side. So in the Jacob Penney case, I think the right generally is saying he's not just a hero, but it's also, there's a vilification of the guy that got killed, and saying that, yeah, if the state won't take care of getting rid of that kind of person and being that person being a threat to normal citizens, then it is time for citizens to take that into their own hands. And that's what I don't like about it. I am all for self-defense. I'm a Second Amendment guy. I'm a constitutional kind of carry guy in the state of Oklahoma. I think that, being prepared for a situation like that often diffuses the situation. Like me, as a guy that carries a gun, which surprises a lot of people, because I maybe don't look like one or something, and I don't carry it on my hip, and I don't wear a shirt that says Glock on it. I don't know. These are all kind of silly things that I think some people do because I don't want to be a target. But I'm also just like, it makes me go, okay, I'm going to assess a situation, and I hope I never, ever, ever have to use a gun. I mean, it's just, I don't want to. When I hear someone that says, man, I hope someone breaks into my house so that I can shoot them, I'm like, all right, you might not be the kind of person that should have a gun, So I'm all for self-defense. And I think in this situation, Jacob Penny acted rationally. And I think that he did what he thought was the best situation. He didn't punch the guy. He didn't try to knock him out. He didn't violently attack him. He put him in a chokehold, and that ended up killing him. It's a tragic situation no matter what. But when I look at it, I say, let's look at the facts. Let's look at what the law is. Let's see, did this guy break the law? And I think it's obvious that juries get this right most of the time. I think in this situation, the jury got it right. Juries don't always get it right. I don't necessarily think that it's jury's fault when they get it wrong, but I mean, we've got to have some sort of system that we all agree is going to work. And what concerns me about both of these cases is that you have people going, well, we don't have trust in that system anymore. And so therefore, we've got to take matters into our own hand, and we got to celebrate when people do that. So that's what I want to talk about today. Some of the psychology there, what worries me about that. So let's go back to the United Healthcare CEO thing first. The first thing I've noticed is that since this happened last week, at first it was awfully sometimes blamed on the left as far as the reaction to it. We saw this, the left is excusing violence, and it's Democrats excusing violence. And to be fair, it is sometimes. I mean, Elizabeth Warren said to Huffington Post, let's see, what her quote was, "Violence is never the answer, but," I love the "but" here. That's so great. "Violence is never the answer, but people can be pushed only so far. This is a warning that if you push people hard enough, they lose faith in the ability of their government to make change, lose faith in the ability of people who are providing the healthcare to make change, and start to take matters into their own hands in ways that will ultimately be a threat to everyone." So again, this is a little bit more on the side of excuse making. And there have certainly been more liberal people willing to go out on television or in magazines and newspapers and say things like this, where it's like, violence is never the answer, but it is the answer if we don't change things about healthcare. It's rational for someone to murder someone because they're upset in some way. So I think, in some ways, the most prominent people have been. But it's very clear online that this is not a left versus right thing. This is everyone has health insurance or doesn't have it, and that's why they're upset. I think everyone's had frustrations with medical bills and insurance and fighting things and dealing with all that. I certainly have myself. And so this became sort of this universal thing where people said, healthcare, the health insurance companies are evil, and therefore this guy was justified in killing that guy. This is good. We've seen posters pop up in New York and elsewhere, wanted posters for other CEOs of health insurance companies. I saw a poster that was sort of the Obama hope thing, but a screen grab of the video of this man shooting this father and husband who happens to be the CEO of a health insurance company. And so, that's hope for some people. Like, people are putting this stuff, people are selling merchandise. We saw the whole 4B movement just disappear with these women that saying they were not going to date, they weren't going to have sex, they weren't going to get married, they weren't going to have babies, they weren't doing any of this stuff because of Donald Trump's reelection. All of a sudden you get this like handsome guy with abs that murders someone and they're like, "Ooh, I'd do him." It's bizarre. And it's become, like I said, not just an excuse of a side. That's what I kept saying this whole time. I've been saying, when we excuse bad actions on our side, it gives permission to the other side to also do those bad actions or to do worse. This is beyond making excuses. This is celebrating in sort of hero worship of someone that planned to murder someone. What we know about the guy so far, I don't think matters a ton. He had some sort of manifesto with him. He explained some of the stuff. It doesn't sound super coherent, and it sounds like this is going to be the same situation that we had with Trump's near assassination. This is a troubled young man in his 20s, allegedly had a back injury when he was in Hawaii and needed to have surgery. I assume that's where the insurance part comes in, is some sort of denial of stuff. Admitted to doing, sort of self-medication with psychedelics and things. I think this kid's brain was a little bit broken. He's obviously very smart. He attended, by the way, it's especially hilarious to me that this guy is, this is sort of becoming a talk of a class warfare situation. It's like, oh, we're taking out the elite. This guy was in the family that is very rich. They own country clubs, and he went to a like $40,000 a year private school in high school. Then he went to Ivy League schools for college. This is not someone that had some extraordinarily hard life or anything. It just sounds like the same thing that we see with a lot of school shooters or these sort of lone wolf situations. They go off the grid. They completely isolate. His family didn't know where he was for a while. In fact, his mom had submitted, I think, a missing person sort of report on him in November because he had just completely lost contact with family. It sounds like it's a sad case that turns into someone thinking that being violent is the answer. But what concerns me about that is, like, we're going to have those kind of outliers that happen. There are, most of the time in these sort of assassination attempts or situations where you've got lone wolf kind of gunmen or school shooters or, any sort of public shooting, mass shooting kind of situations, it's the same story over and over and over and over again. But generally, it's not celebrated. What happens when we start celebrating and lifting someone up as a hero for this? And you saw this with the Trump near assassination. We saw people that came out and were like, I wish he wouldn't have missed. And I called that out and said, that is wrong. It doesn't matter. I don't like Donald Trump. I think he's not fit to be the president. I'm worried about what he will do as the president for a second term. I'm concerned about it. But I do not, for so many reasons, do not want him to be assassinated. One, because that's not how we should solve things. And two, I think that just makes someone a martyr. And I think the consequences of that are much worse than the benefit of not having Donald Trump in politics anymore. I think that it would have opened a gigantic can of worms and would have made January 6th look like child's play. So there's just a significant, it just hit me. Like, okay, we are like dealing with something way worse than making excuses or sort of justifications for stuff. We are now actually like celebrating this kind of action. And it's happened on the right a lot more. I mean, it happens on both sides. But I want to be specific. I don't think this is as much of a left-right thing, specifically with this assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. Ben Shapiro got a lot of pushback when he posted a video about the leftists embracing violence. Got a lot of pushback from people on the right that said, you are actually one of the elite. You are more like him, the CEO, than you are like us. And that is like some populist nonsense right there. When it becomes this class warfare thing, because everyone can have a problem with someone else. So if you start saying, well, if you're a millionaire, yeah, you're fair game to be murdered. Or if you run a company I don't like, you're fair game to be murdered. Once that becomes the through line, it's impossible for that not to become a sort of class warfare situation of saying that like everything, you being good or evil is based on whatever your bank account says or where you live or what kind of company you work at or how high up at that company you are. And the reason that concerns me is that it goes the other way with the subway situation. I think there are plenty of people that would say, well, that person, because they're homeless, mentally ill, whatever, is a different class of person. And that gets a little more tricky because most people don't think of class warfare as, they think of, oh, well, the elite people are trying to keep us down, or this is the company trying to like keep the worker down. I mean, you see all that kind of stuff with Bernie Sanders crowd and the sort of, go back to 2010s and the Occupy Wall Street stuff. See that sort of stuff of like, oh, these people are stealing from us, or the transfer of wealth or inequality or whatever the situation is. And it becomes this normal pitting against like middle class to upper class. That's normally what we're talking about. Because if you noticed, there was not really any talk of poor people at the Occupy Wall Street stuff. It was all talks about like, I need more. It was about me, and it was like these elite people. I mean, when I say elite, I really do mean that if you go to college in this country and you graduate from college and then have a job, you are in an elite class of people. It's not, the whole country doesn't go to college. It's only like a third of the country that goes to and graduates college. And so you are in a minority of the country as far as your well-being goes. And I'm not saying you can't have political issues that you get behind, or you can't say that, like I said, I think health insurance needs to change. I think we need drastic changes to our healthcare system. I don't want to get into the weeds on that right now because we could spend way too much time talking about health insurance and stuff. But my point is that the class warfare of saying that CEO's life is not worth being sad over, because there were people on TV saying they were joyful when they heard it. Which is, this is like, these are journalists that are saying this. Elizabeth Warren saying violence is never the answer, but there's not a but after that. It's gotta be violence is not the answer, period. But if you put a but after it, it doesn't work anymore. And so I think what I've realized is that I was wrong about this being a left-right thing. I thought that what it always was about your side and your tribe, and it was a team sport situation. And I do think that is still the case sometimes. But, this Brian Thompson murder has kind of opened the floodgates, I feel like, we were already in this populist moment, and it was clear that people don't care about democratic norms. It's pretty clear that people didn't care about, not reelecting a guy that tried to steal an election last time and sent a mob to the Capitol. It was clear that people just kind of went, you know what? We're so mad about pick the issue that we're willing to have someone circumvent the law to take care of it. And I think that's pretty clear in the reelection of Donald Trump. I think it's pretty clear in the hero worship of this Luigi Mangioni guy that allegedly killed the Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. I think it's even pretty clear in the sort of hero worship of Jacob Penney. Like I said, I don't think Jacob Penney should have been prosecuted for his crimes at all. I certainly don't think he should have been convicted of it, especially in a state where, the reason people are going like he's a hero has become not because he acted in the moment in a rational way. That's not the thing that people are talking about on the right. What they're talking about is, well, look, New York won't prosecute crimes. We've got to take justice into our own hands, which I don't think is what happened here at all, but it is sort of the framing that I'm starting to see, not just starting to see, I mean, it's been going on. And like I said, you can say, I think the jury got it right. I don't think that the prosecution should have happened in the first place. And you can even criticize the DA and the prosecutor's willingness to go after this guy for reckless homicide, but not go after, the guy that was arrested, the guy that ended up dying. I think he'd been arrested 53 times in the lead up to that and was released every time, never charged. It's pretty clear that he was mentally not okay and was a danger to himself and others. And yet the state, I guess there's some sort of list that New York City has of like, these are the people we're keeping an eye on because we think they're a danger. And they can't figure out what to do because we got mental health problems here in the United States too. You can't commit someone. They can only commit themselves. We are in a bad situation for sure with criminal justice where you have to be arrested and charged and convicted of a crime to be able to get the mental health help you need, especially if you need, drugs, for example. And this is something I'm fully aware of, by the way, because I have a cousin who is in prison in Texas for a similar situation. It's bipolar. Unfortunately, when he doesn't take his medication, he makes bad decisions, as a lot of people with mental health problems do. And I'm not talking about depression and bipolar disorder is a serious mental condition that if you're not taking that medication, you might not behave well. And he got arrested enough times that a judge finally threw the book at him and sent him to jail for, I think, way too long for the property crime he created. But, that it got him the help he needed, and he's on medication. He's doing much, much better than he was before he's in jail. I would still prefer him not to be in prison for, decades for breaking into his former house to get his stuff back. This is not how the criminal justice should work for mental health, but that's unfortunately the way the pendulum swung after we closed all the mental health institutions and changed the rules about how to do it. It's a complicated situation, but we've got to go, okay, this is a problem. We need to solve it as a society, not, well, we should just allow the murder of mentally ill people who are on the streets. That's not the solution to this. You're not a hero because you go kill some guy. And I'm sure that Jacob Penny doesn't feel like a hero. I'm sure he wishes this never happened so he didn't have to deal with all this legal crap, right? It's the elevation of someone from, hey, I think what he did was right, or in the moment. Like I said, the law, I think, needs to be specific enough that we could say, here's the law. Did this person break it? And I think there are situations where we have to weigh that. And that's why we have juries do that. We have them sit down, look at all the facts and go, okay, what do you think? Guilty, not guilty? And it's clear in this case that they thought they were deadlocked on the first count, and then the judge basically dismissed that count, went to the other count, which is the lesser one, which was, I think the two things were the reckless homicide was the first charge, and then the second one was, I can't remember what it is. Anyway, it was this lesser charge, which they came back with a not guilty thing, which is kind of weird, right? It's weird that the jury was deadlocked on on the harsher count, but then came back with a not guilty verdict. Maybe they just didn't think the prosecution did their job. I don't know. They're the jury. That's what they're supposed to do. But this is not about the system. This is not about the jury. This isn't really even about the prosecutors. Although, like I said, I think that they've been behaving badly by not, the DA, Alvin Bragg, has chosen to go after Jacob Penny and Donald Trump, but he won't, charge people with normal property crimes or violent crimes even, and stuff that are lesser in his eyes. And I don't know that that's what we're supposed to be doing with DAs. I think that we need to have a conversation in this country. And by the way, this is not a country thing. This is you've got to have that conversation inside of your community. You've got to have that at a local level, because the president doesn't have anything to do with DAs. You do in that specific district or county or state. And we got to talk about, like, are these laws that we want to enforce or not? I think that if we don't want to enforce the law, we should take it off the books. I think, period. If we say that this is a bad law, let's get rid of it. If it is a law and we've decided, we elect legislators, they put something in the law. I think if we say something's illegal, we've got to prosecute that, whether someone is rich or poor or well-connected or not well-connected. I don't think and I think that's what people are really frustrated about. It's pretty clear that people think the system is broken, and the system is only looking out for a different kind of person normally than them. It's no one ever admits that they're the beneficiary of the state. Everyone likes to look at, for example, this guy, clearly, the CEO assassin, clearly well-to-do in the sense that comes from a wealthy family, attended private schools, attended Ivy League schools. I think he was valedictorian in his high school. He's clearly a smart guy. He had a job. It sounds like maybe an injury was the precipice for this whole thing and some sort of mental breakdown. I don't know. It doesn't matter what the reasons are. For some reason, he thought it was a good idea to go murder someone, and this was a vengeful sort of killing, it sounds like. To not even think through, like, what actually needs to change. It's not like he tried to go through Congress first, or it's not like he went to his local legislator and said, hey, this is something that I had a problem with that I think should change. It's not like he started a nonprofit group or something. He just decided the way to solve this is to murder someone. And like I said, I think there's mental illness here, or drug-induced mental illness or something. I don't think, this does not sound like a rational person. First of all, I mean, just the fact that he's caught at a McDonald's with all the evidence on him is not, he didn't get rid of the gun. If it's the same gun, I would assume it is. Why did he use a ghost gun when, he doesn't have a criminal history? He could just buy a gun. There's nothing that says he couldn't just go buy a gun. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that's why I go, okay, clearly you're smart enough to plan this whole thing and get away for a significant amount of time, but you're too dumb or not mentally there to go to McDonald's with a backpack with all the stuff, all the evidence still in there, and a manifesto and all these things. So there's something off there, just like there was something off about the Trump assassination attempt. Clearly that person was not thinking all the way rationally, smart enough to plan it, but not, thinking that this was like a good idea and thinking that maybe this brings infamy, and maybe that we don't know the motivation. Maybe this guy wants the infamy too. My problem is that I've always said my biggest problem with school shooters and mass shooters in general is that we give them the infamy that they desired, and that we should stop doing that. And I think that it would reduce the frequency of these kind of events, because if there's not the motivation of getting the infamy, if you know that people aren't going to say your name, for example, which is why I don't say the Trump assassination attempt's name. I don't say mass shooters' names. I don't say school shooters' names, because I think that's giving them what they want. I think that's bad. But like, I've been trying to mitigate, how do you stop these kind of things from happening? Because that's what the conversation is after every mass shooting or school shooting. It's like, how do we stop this? And I've never, because I don't hang out in the corners of the internet that would celebrate such a thing, I've never seen one of them celebrated. So this is weird to me that this is essentially that situation, but because the victim was the CEO of a health insurance company, we're celebrating it. If Luigi Mangioni would have just killed a random person on the street with that gun, this is not what happens. Or if he even just would have killed, like, I don't know, his old boss or something, this would not have been celebrated. It wouldn't even made the news, honestly. But once we have a villain, and what this has made me realize is that this is not about defending our side. This is about you deciding as a person what's good and evil, and then celebrating anytime you think good triumphs over evil, even if it's completely outside of the rules or the laws or anything. Because two things are happening. One, if you think something's evil, you will justify any kind of action to stamp it out, which is why it works so well in politics if you paint the other side as evil, because then it excuses any of your behavior. And so we're seeing that over and over and over again. So we're seeing it with Trump all the time. Democrats use Trump's bad behavior as an excuse of saying, look, well, this guy's a fascist and this guy's has evil intentions. And it's not just that, like, he's bad and outside the law. It's this sort of, he's a fascist, he's a dictator, he's evil, whatever. And that will excuse their bad behavior. That excuses the bad behavior of, intelligence officers sending a letter that says, oh, the Hunter Biden laptop, that is a Russian disinformation campaign, even though they knew it wasn't, because they thought their bad behavior was justifiable to stop the evil that was Donald Trump. Did that work out well for them? I don't think it did. And you're seeing the same thing on the right. You're seeing Donald Trump use the excuse of, well, we've got to make an enemy of someone. And it's clear that Donald Trump has decided the enemy is illegal immigrants. And look, we've got to fix the border. We've got to fix immigration. We've got to have a different immigration policy. We are not enforcing the laws that exist on the books. We need to change some of those rules too. I'm all for having that discussion. I think all of that needs to happen, but that's not the tone that Donald Trump is taking. It is an us versus them situation, and it's not tribal. It's becoming like good versus evil. If you notice, he frames the migrant stuff all the time as he frames it all the time as these are criminals, these are rapists, they're emptying the prisons and the mental institutions in other countries and sending them here. When he knows, I would say he knows, I'm never sure with Donald Trump, that's not the majority of the people that are crossing into our country illegally. Do we need to have a border enforcement policy? Absolutely. Do we need to have an actual asylum policy? Absolutely. Do we need to have legal immigration in some sort of way? Yeah, we need to talk about all of that. All of those are policies we need to talk about and agree, compromise, all that kind of stuff. But, when he is saying they're all evil, because that's what you have to do to have a common enemy, that's what I don't like. And then we have the same thing happening on the left. So, but this is not becoming about left versus right. This is really becoming about who do we think is evil, who do we not. It's pretty clear that both left and right are embracing populism and sort of this anti-elite thing. And by the way, elite can mean kind of anything you want it to be, because obviously the CEO of a health insurance company is certainly elite. But if you notice, a lot of the language, especially on the left, but increasingly on the right too, is any CEO is not worth what they get paid. That they're all evil because they're taking more money and they're exploiting workers. And it's becoming this, oh, well, that guy's evil. And so therefore you're good, whatever you think that is justifiable to stop the evil. And pick your poison. On the right, it's become the go-to excuse in the sort of conspiracy theory world of the right is that it's not that Democrats have bad ideas. It's not that they disagree with us on what policies would solve this problem. It's that they are a cabal of pedophiles and they're secretly murdering children and trafficking children, So it's not, which by the way, there's no evidence that that's the case. And so that's what this turns into is, well, I can't just say I disagree with that person. I've got to say that that person is a pedophile without any sort of, like I said, any sort of evidence that that's the case, because then it justifies anything I say or do against them, including killing them. Because look, I think we would all agree that I don't have a lot of sympathy for someone if they're a child sex trafficker, for example. Do I think that they should be murdered by vigilantes? No, I think they should be taken care of by our justice system, because you can make the excuse for it's the would you kill baby Hitler kind of thing. It's like, oh, well, if you know this guy's evil, and look, Hitler was absolutely evil. There's no question about it. But the difference there is that we were making those decisions of like, how do we stop in World War II? We're making these decisions based on, do we think this will kill more people now or later? Like, that's why we dropped bombs on Japan. We said, look, the Japanese are not giving up no matter what. Even though it looks like they've absolutely lost this war, they are continuing to take out tens of thousands of our people. They've killed millions of people in China. They you just look at the World War II is interesting. I've been kind of doing a little bit of World War II kind of stuff lately, watching documentaries and reading stuff, and I was looking just like the numbers of people that died in World War II, and it's. I think most people know the 6 million Jews number for sure, although some people, again, that's their enemy. I don't want to get into that whole weeds, but, it was Russia and China lost more people than anyone in World War II. And that was at the hands of the Germans and the Japanese. And while obviously dropping bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was tragic in the sense that the destruction that happened, it did end the war. And most historians and people at the time were aware that it would kill a lot of people, but far fewer people than if the war continued. It was like 100,000 people, I think, that died in those two. And, you're talking about millions of people if the war continues to go on. So it was hey, we've got to make a decision based on which of these things are going to save more lives. And, even Harry Truman, after dropping the bomb, is like, I think sort of scared of that power that he had and tries to dial that back, where, for the president to have, there was all this stuff that kind of went on in World War II that's really interesting to look at. But my point is there's a difference between going like, we got to make a bad decision here because something's actually evil, which I think it's pretty obvious. Like what was happening in World War II was good versus evil. I think that there's just no way to look at it a different way. This is like, health insurance is not a good versus evil situation. I think the system is definitely broken and it needs fixing. Murdering CEOs is not going to do it. What do we think that, this class warfare is going to accomplish? Let's say you murdered every health insurance CEO. Let's just say that the people that are cheering this on and hailing this guy as a hero, what if they got their way and they murdered all of them? What do they think that would change? I think it's an important question to ask. Do you think that all those companies would all of a sudden be like, you know what? I think that we should just run at a loss. We should just lose money and we should, have to let people go. And we should, no, I don't think that would be the result. I don't think that hospitals and doctors and the government and Medicare and Medicaid would all of a sudden change all the cost structures because CEOs were getting murdered. I don't think that's what would happen. Maybe it's a catalyst for talking about this stuff. I don't see that Congress is very serious about fixing any of these kind of stuff because I think it's so entrenched and there are so many special interest groups that there's no way to get out of this neatly. People that think that, oh, well, the solution is single payer healthcare where the government pays for all this stuff. Look, Americans seem to want a few things. They want their healthcare to be cheap or free. They want it to be fast. They want it to be good. And they would like to be able to do it with the doctors that they would like to see. Their preferred doctors, their primary care. They want to pick their surgeon and stuff. There is no healthcare system in the world that has all of those factors working like that. That's a pipe dream. It's not realistic at all. And I think you can even tell by this guy's manifesto, he did not have the solution either. He just thought, well, maybe I'll just kill the guy. And it's maybe a little bit of proof that this is complicated, but I'm very concerned that we are worshiping and sort of putting people on a pedestal that decide to be vigilantes. And I know that's a strange thing to say as someone that's, as big of a Batman fan as I am. For a guy that's a Batman obsessed nerd, to be like vigilantism is bad, but it is, because that's just, those are comic books and movies. That's not the real world. I don't think that anyone should dress up in a costume and go take the law into their own hands. I also don't think things are that bad. I think there is understandable frustration with the justice system in the sense that people think that there is a two-tier justice system. And I don't disagree, actually, that that's the case. Because I think you look at, basically, if you have money, if you're rich, if you're a celebrity, you get a different kind of treatment in the justice system sometimes. Or if you're a politician, there's sometimes like those people get a different form of justice than the guy that, lost his life on the subway. Like that person with resources, if you're from a wealthy family or if you have the resources to go, for example, look like just drug addiction alone. Okay. We've got a huge drug addiction problem in the country. It's been absolutely devastated by fentanyl coming into the country, and you've got people dying by last year's the first year we had a dip in fentanyl overdoses and opioid overdoses in general. I think last year is the first year we had a dip. That's probably partially due to like Narcan and stuff being more widely spread out. I'm curious to actually see some more data on what actually caused that dip, but it's a problem. And this is something that affects, I'm not sure I know anyone that isn't somehow connected to someone that's been affected by the opioid crisis. I've lost people I know. Both my wife's mom and stepdad both died of opioid overdoses. And so it's a real thing for me. And I know it's a problem, but just look at that. And if you have the money to pay to go to rehab, you have a better chance of kicking that addiction than if you don't have the money to go to rehab. Rehab is expensive. Okay. That's a conversation we need to have as a country to say, how do we fix this problem that's killing people, and it's killing young and old? And it's a lot of people on the opioid specific side of things are going in for a surgery, getting prescribed these drugs, and then getting addicted to them. And we've obviously done some stuff with the pharmaceutical companies that were certainly evil in the way that they pushed this drug and lied about its side effects. They lied about its efficacy and its side effects. And they knew that it was a problem, and they continued to put profits over people's health, and not just health, but like people were dying of this stuff. So I think going after those companies and suing them and state AGs going after them is totally good and fair. And let's let this work out in courts. And a lot of them have lost in those courts. And I think that that's fine. I don't think it would be fine for someone to murder some members of those families or people on those boards or people that were the CEOs of those companies. Now, maybe that's too idealistic of me to think that that's to go these extra judicial ways is bad. But I think it's becoming clear that I might be in the minority in this country. And that really concerns me, because I thought our populism was more about sort of these tribal things. I thought it was about us versus them, but it was more us versus them based on ideas, or us versus them, sometimes based on race. To pretend there's not racism still in this country is ridiculous. But also to pretend that it's the excuse for everything is also ridiculous. And I think what I've just realized is that it's not really about a left versus right thing. It's really just about, going back to Thanksgiving, I think it's a lack of gratitude. I think you look at the complaints from people. Like I said, if you go to college, if you graduate from college, you are going to make more money than most of the people in this country. You are going to be in the top 25, 20, 10, 50, somewhere in that range of earners in this country. You're going to have better jobs. You're going to have better health. You're going to have better health insurance. You're going to have better health care. You're going to have all sorts of better things. And yet I think that the problem with inequality is that there's always somewhere else to be. Unless you are Elon Musk and the richest man in the world, who I think still is looking for things. I think it might not just be money. I think there's always a step up, and there's always someone to be jealous of. And so it's these people that are in the, like, maybe they're in the 80th percentile of people in this country. They're better off than 4/5 of the country. And yet, if you were like in the 80th percentile, you're looking at the person that's in the 81st percentile and going like, yeah, but it's not fair that they have more than me. And it was one thing when it was just, oh, it's unfair, and let's change that it's unfair because I want what they have. And it's become a totally different thing now that we're excusing murdering the people that have more than us. Or we feel somehow have outsized influence in our problems or pain or whatever it is. And it's just interesting to me that it's not this class thing that I'm talking about. I've not seen it be someone that's actually below the poverty line. I'm sure it exists. But it seems like those people are trying to survive, probably. Those people are trying to make ends meet and put food on the table. And by the way, even if you're below the poverty line in the United States, you are richer than most of the world. You have, not that we don't have hunger problems in the United States, not that we don't have real poverty, not saying that. Obviously, if you're living on the streets, that's a problem. Even the people living on the streets that I say, I live downtown in Oklahoma City, so I see homeless people all the time. They cruise through the neighborhood every once in a while. Every one of them's got a smartphone. Like, poor people in Syria don't have a smartphone necessarily. So I'm not saying I'm not belittling their situation. I'm just saying it's worth being grateful for what you have. It's also worth not pitting where you are and looking at the person that's above you and saying, well, now this is a good versus evil thing. And that's what concerns me about this. And I know this is just like a long rant about being concerned about that, but it really concerns me. And it concerns me that it's politicians that are getting on this. Violence is never the answer, but it concerns me that this has become a thing on the internet where it's, Ben Shapiro is now getting, well, look, you're one of the elites. You've got more in common with that CEO than you do with me. Therefore, what? If you're just not going to follow him or listen to him, fine. It doesn't bother me. But if it turns into, well, but if you're with them, then you're the evil one, and therefore violence towards you is justified. And look, this is not a new thing. I realize it seems like a new thing. I'm 41. So I was born in the 80s. To pretend that this country does not have a violent history is foolish. We do. There's a lot of really shocking violence that's happened in this country. Some of it was not that long ago. I mean, honestly, we had more domestic terrorism in the 70s. I can't remember the stats. It's something like there was like a bombing a day or something in certain years in the 70s. Don't totally quote me on that. I don't have that number up in front of me. I should have had it, but a lot of them didn't kill people and stuff. So it just rarely, but like that hasn't happened in my lifetime. There's been an escalation, I think, since 2020 of political violence. We had the Black Lives Matter riots. We had the January 6th riots. And those were more situations where you saw this tribal thing of left versus right. The left was excusing the Black Lives Matter riots, saying, well, sometimes violence is speech and it's therefore justifiable. We had the same thing on January 6th. You had, well, what do you expect? People are upset. Well, I expect them not to be violent. And what I think is happening now, and there's a great, I've referenced it before, but there's a Malcolm Gladwell article I think it was in the New Yorker. I'll try to remember to put it in the show notes, but it's talking about how school shootings specifically were a riot in slow motion, I think is what his words were for it. Because basically going back to Columbine, that was sort of a catalyst to where almost every school shooter after that was mimicking a lot of the things that they saw in those people. So it was a lot of the same sort of manifesto stuff. It was referencing those people. It was some of the same actions. They would like video themselves and all this. It was clear that this was a slow moving riot. Whereas like a normal riot happens like Black Lives Matter or January 6th, where maybe one person starts to try to smash a window and the second person is like, yeah, that sounds fun. And then it just quickly spreads. And all of a sudden you have a bunch of people that would never otherwise do that get caught up in it and kind of go, it's very like the mob mentality is a fascinating psychological thing that happens. And so anyway, his point was that school shootings were sort of like this slow burning riot that sort of everyone's sort of taking a cue from the last person as a reason to do the thing that they're doing, but it just moves a lot slower than a normal riot. I think we might be like that with sort of political violence in general, because I think Black Lives Matter and January 6th were certainly sort of catalyst for excusing the behavior on your side. And what you see from a lot of the January 6th kind of defendants, and I've had one on the show, if you want to go back to that episode, you know, the common refrain is, well, it's just really unfair because these people were prosecuted and these other people weren't. And so it became but yeah, they didn't prosecute Black Lives Matter despite, Minneapolis is a city in Minnesota. The federal government can't charge rioters. And that's not how, the justice system works. But, that was the excuse. It was like, well, our people shouldn't be punished because their people weren't punished. And it becomes excuse making, as opposed to, on the left, I heard a little bit more of it of like, well, sometimes violence is the right answer. And I don't hear as much of that, although it's very convoluted with the January 6th stuff, because some people are like, yeah, they should be angry because the election was stolen, but also they didn't do it as Antifa. I mean, their logic is totally flawed, but it still seemed more like both sides were doing excuse making as opposed to encouraging the behavior and saying this is a good thing. These people are heroes. It's also a lot harder to put a group of people up on a pedestal. It's a lot easier to put a person up on a pedestal and to use them as sort of a hero or politicize it. But I think we're starting to see that. Like we saw it with Kyle Rittenhouse. The right certainly embraced that, even though I think the criminality part of it got it right in the sense that what he did could be considered self-defense, but he went looking for that trouble by traveling from out of state to a place where he knew violence and this was happening. And that's not his job. His job is not to go protect the businesses in some other state that he doesn't live in. I think we should not reward that behavior. We should not say that that's good behavior. Same thing with Zimmerman. That was the case where the security shoots the unarmed black kid in the neighborhood, and it becomes this, we got to pick a side. And again, I think that maybe legally he was in the clear, but like it was not the proper thing to do as a gun owner, as a neighborhood watch person or anything like that. Like we can say behavior is bad, but still not criminal. And we can still say that is not how we should function. And to me, that's just totally shifted. It's totally shifted to, we are saying these people are heroes. And I don't want to, the Jacob Penney situation, I really do think, like I said, I think he made a decision in the moment. He was not looking for that trouble. He happened to be there. It went down. I'm not trying to equate these two situations. I'm only trying to equate the reaction to them in the sense that I don't want to lift people up as heroes. Like, there are certainly situations where people do heroic things. Normally it involves saving lives, though. It doesn't involve murdering people. And I think that's the shift that I'm worried about, is like, will there be a slow burning riot based on this New York CEO assassination? Will the posters that are encouraging these people, like I said, I think there's a mental illness problem here. I think there's a psychosis problem. I do not think that this is fully functioning, mentally, totally fit people going, yeah, this is the plan. I'm going to murder this person, and this is X, and then X, Y, and Z is going to happen. I don't think there's that much planning going into it. But I do wonder if it doesn't take that many mentally ill people, or even people that just feel encouraged by the notoriety that someone gets, for this to get out of hand. And I think the solution for that is for everyone to say, especially politicians, media, people that have outsized influence, to say, this is wrong. It doesn't matter who the victim is. Murder is wrong. And I'm just not seeing that. I'm not seeing that from, and I am seeing that when people have come out and said that, they're getting blowback from that on social media and stuff. That concerns me. And I worry about what happens especially when it comes to politics, when people do bad things. For example, I think Joe Biden's pardon of Hunter and alleged considering preemptive pardons for people like Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff, Anthony Fauci. I think that action, what it does, it says, oh, well, look, we're right. The elite are protecting themselves, or the Democrats are protecting themselves, and they've got a different tier of justice than we do. And then that excuses their side to do something else. And I do think this does mostly break down sometimes the left and right. But there's some situations that I think that you give people an enemy, and, that's the whole, Wicked is huge right now at the box office. And that's sort of the whole, thing is, spoiler alert, it's a movie based on a 20-year-old Broadway show, based on a book, based on a movie from 100 years ago. I don't think I'm ruining anything by saying, the whole plot of Wicked is, the Wizard of Oz is the bad guy, because his whole point was to give people a common enemy, and how well that works when people are upset. Donald Trump's doing it with immigration and other things, and Democrats and anyone that he doesn't like. It's not just that I disagree with them. It's that they're an enemy of the people. I think Joe Biden and Democrats are doing it to a degree. I think Elizabeth Warren is certainly doing it by saying violence isn't the answer unless, the CEOs of companies are bad to people, and then, people are going to have a breaking point. It's excusing it. And I'm just concerned about what happens next. So I realized that wasn't maybe super helpful informationally, and it's just me kind of worrying out loud for an hour. But I hope you got something out of it. And I plan on doing more about healthcare, because I think that is obviously a hot button issue, clearly. And I would like to talk more about it. And I will talk more about it, but not on this show, because this show's been long enough. So thanks for joining me. I really do appreciate you being here. If you can do like one thing for me, though, you could rate the podcast. That helps me a lot. Keep in mind that all this stuff, on YouTube and Instagram, it's all algorithmic, which means that YouTube and Instagram get to decide when my stuff goes in front of people. Podcasts, fortunately, are not like that. You will get, if you subscribe on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen, and if you rate it, that just helps more people potentially subscribe. It shows up in your feed, and you can choose to listen to it or not. You don't decide, like Apple and Spotify are going to give you the things you subscribe to, and then you can pay attention to them if you want. So it really does help if you subscribe and you rate the podcast. But if you can do two things, I guess that was two things, but that's essentially one thing. That's not very hard. It's two buttons you press. You can do that. But the other thing you can do that really helps me is share something that you think someone would like on Instagram or YouTube, because that is kind of the way I'm trying to get people to this. And if you find value in this content and value in someone not having their hair on fire and screaming that everything's on fire and trying to make you be fearful, and I guess I just did say I'm scared of what happens next, but I think it's a pretty fair fear. You be the judge of that. You can email me at Blake at the Homeless Conservative if you have disagreements, and I'm happy to chat about them. New stuff will be coming in the new year. I'm kind of doing some game planning stuff. If you noticed, I haven't had like normal people on lately. I've either been doing it by myself or having some sort of expert or journalist or someone on. I do want to get back into that. I've kind of changed how I want to do that. So if you're interested in coming and talking to me on the show, shoot me an email at Blake at thehomelessconservative.com. I'm going to kick that back up in the new year. But that is it for me for this episode. Thanks for joining me again. Hope you have a good one.